the 1990s. In February of 1990, Photoshop 1.0 was released, and this was released for the Macintosh only. The cost, a whopping $4,000. The size, a mere 373 kilobytes. That's kilobytes. That's not even 1 meg. And it took 3 floppy disks for the installation. Later on, in the fall, Photoshop 2.0 is released, and the code name for this was Fast Eddie because in less than a year, a new version of Photoshop was out. I want you to note the toolbar here. This was the toolbar from version 1.07. Notice that there are some tools that you might recognize. There are no hidden tools. Everything is very flat and it is very minimal. 91 remained fairly quiet. There was continued revisions made to the program, and the new versions were released in 92. In November of 92, actually a Microsoft Windows port of the software was released. This was a pretty big deal. Moving on to 93, we see Photoshop version 2.5.1. And it was one of the first apps to run native on a PowerPC chip. So that was, again, a really big deal to start this cross-platform. And notice now this is the toolbar from version 2.5.1. There's a little bit more. We have a foreground and background color. Still no hidden tools. A few more tools there on the toolbar for selecting. However, still very, very basic. I want to note version 2 was the first version that I started working with. So I have worked with Photoshop for a long time, getting close to 25 years. And it has changed tremendously. I think, though, it's very beneficial, all of the changes. So let's move on to 94. So in 94, again, another version. We're looking at Photoshop 3.0. It shipped in September. It was actually September 1st of 1994. And this, a Windows version actually was released in November of that same year. The code name for the Mac version was Tiger Mountain. Now this was the best release ever. This was when layers were first introduced. Thomas Knoll was responsible for their development. So layers, let me tell you, layers were huge. Also, tabbed palettes. They were called palettes back then. We call them panels now. The ability to have tabbed so you could kind of hide one behind to the next. And the fun thing that they put into this version and many versions after were Easter eggs. Easter eggs were funny little one-liners that would appear when you would press obscure combinations of keys. 1996. 1996 brought in version 4.0. And the key thing with this version, the key commands were changed, and this became a very controversial topic within industry. Moving forward to 1998, this is when version 5.0 ships. And the main feature that was added is the history palette. Now remember, we called those panels palettes back then. So it was the history palette, which again, awesome, because now we didn't have just one undo. We could go back 20 states or however many history states I had my history panel set to. So this was a really great thing for undoing some of our tasks in Photoshop. 1999, version 5.5 ships, and this was the first true web-ready version of the app. So the 1990s brought significant change to Photoshop. We went from really bare minimum to working with layers and having the history panel. So it really did progress throughout those years.